Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Ernest Lunning with Colorado Politics, here with Representative Gabe Evans, a Republican seeking a second term in Colorado's 8th Congressional District. He's going to be answering questions today prepared by AARP Colorado. And we'll be asking the same questions to the Democrats who are running in a primary for the chance to face Representative Evans next year. Representative Evans, please take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us why you're running.
Yeah, Ernest, always great to sit down with you, Congressman Gabe Evans, Colorado's 8th Congressional District. So that's the North Denver suburbs up to and including all of Greeley. I was born and raised in this state. So taking care of Colorado, taking care of the country, it's critically important to me. It's why I served for 22 years in the military in law enforcement, 12 years in the U.S. Army and Colorado Army National Guard, one combat deployment overseas to the Middle East as part of the global war on terror, another 10 years in law enforcement with the city of Arvada. And so taking care of the state, taking care of this country is incredibly important to me. It's important to my family. Been married for 16 years, have 2 boys. And so just want to make sure, like as Ronald Reagan said, we're able to pass on to them, that freedom, that liberty, that American dream. Every generation has to fight for it, preserve it, protect it, hand it off. That's what I did in the military and law enforcement. That's what I look forward to continuing to do in Congress.
All right. Our first question is about caregiving. We say new data shows that there's more than 1 million family caregivers in Colorado. What kind of policies or legislation would you champion to ease caregiver burdens?
It's a great question, and it's one that's particularly important to me because at both the beginning of life and unfortunately the end of life, my family's been engaged in that space with my grandparents before they passed, and then with one of my kids, medically complex. And so we had tons of in-home medical equipment that we had to manage and learn and train on in order to be able to give this critical care. And so some of the things that we have to do in this space are just make sure that the medical system works for lay people, for in-home caregivers. Something as simple as oxygen. One of my sons had to be on oxygen for 6 months right after he was born. And so finding the correct technology to be able to actually meet the needs of the patient and then also help with the caregiver, critically important. It's why I'm the lead sponsor of the SOAR Act, which looks to make more choices available and accessible to folks, particularly in the oxygen space. But there's a lot of other different things that we can look at in this area just to make the medical system, insurance, and the actual devices themselves more available, more affordable, and wrap them in less bureaucracy. We've got to have the system working for patients and for caregivers.
In terms of livable communities, something the AARP is very concerned with, older Coloradans are not immune to the housing affordability crisis. No one is. What policy solutions will you seek to help Coloradans 50 and older find and keep affordable housing?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we could talk about in this space. The first is just the inventory of homes. They say that in the Colorado area, generally the Front Range, we're close to 100,000 housing units short in inventory, and of course that raises the prices. So one of the things in the Working Families Tax Cut, which was passed and signed into law earlier this year, was a tax credit for home builders to be able to incentivize the production of, think of them as starter homes or lower cost housing units. Yeah. And so an analysis of that tax credit said that that's going to bring about 30,000 additional housing units to the Colorado inventory. Okay. So that's one of the things that we're working on that we've actually passed into law. Another thing is just the price of energy and utilities. We've seen the news this week that the Public Utilities Commission in Colorado is looking to phase out natural gas as a home heating source by 2050. That's going to raise prices for everyone. And so I've done a lot of work on the Energy and Commerce Committee to make sure that folks have energy choice, that we have energy freedom, we have energy reliability, because when we have those, that drives the cost of utilities down, that drives the cost of housing down, that drives the cost of manufacturing new housing inventory down. I actually have a piece of legislation on the floor in the U.S. House this week, state planning for reliability and affordability, designed to drive those costs down, make sure that housing remains affordable.
Okay. Well, thanks. Kind of on the same topic, as the number of Coloradans over age 50 increases, what can be done to help them age in place and remain in their communities?
Something that is incredibly important to me, because as a police officer, that was something that I interacted with on a daily basis at times. As a cop, I remember my first year, my sergeant, when we did my annual evaluation, he said, Gabe, you had a great year. You made 41 arrests. You went to 1,800 calls for service. So 1,759 times out of 1,800 as a police officer, I'm going to help folks with issues like this, non-criminal matters, but helping, how do we help somebody stay in their home? How do we help them have the mobility to be able to get around? How do we make sure that they have the affordability to be able to meet all of those daily needs? And so one of the big things Congress is focusing on, and that I've been very heavily engaged in, is just that cost of living crisis. Another component of the Working Families Tax Cut was, as we all heard, the no tax on Social Security. So the bottom 88% of Social Security recipients are now going to pay no taxes on Social Security. An individual that's making less than $75,000 a year, or a couple that's making less than $150,000 a year, Social Security is going to be untaxed for these folks. And so that money can be turned around in order to help them maintain that freedom to be able to stay in their home and have some extra money to be able to meet those affordability or transportation or whatever other challenges they're facing.
Okay. Turning to healthcare and health in general, which is a big topic, what do you see as the biggest public health challenge facing the state, and how will you address it in office?
I think one of the biggest concerns on everybody's mind is just the rising cost of healthcare, and specifically health insurance. And so in that Working Families Tax Cuts, we actually had a provision that would have lowered the benchmark plan for the Affordable Care Act by 12%. Unfortunately, that was stripped out in the Democrat-controlled Senate. But that affordability is something that's critically important to Republicans. It's something that's critically important to me. We've made the largest investment in rural health care in U.S. history, a $50 billion infusion of funds to rural health care. We've put another $200 billion toward Medicaid across the country. And so Republicans and myself are focused on getting more resources into the healthcare space, but making sure that those resources are used correctly, and we're cutting out waste and abuse. One of my pieces of legislation was around Medicare and Medicaid fraud prevention. And it requires that when a doctor either retires or unfortunately dies, that their Medicaid and Medicare prescribing number, so the authorization to be able to prescribe through those programs, that it's pulled out of the program so that we don't have a situation where that number is still active and then potentially subject to fraud that's taking resources away from folks who need it and going to fraudulent situations. So that was another bipartisan piece of legislation that I've introduced, and components of that, again, were included in the Working Families Tax Cut, which was signed into law to cut that fraud out, make sure the resources are going where they need to go.
All right. And from a legislative perspective, what can be done to improve our state as a great place for fitness, health, and well-being for Coloradans of all ages?
I was born and raised in this state, so we know that Colorado is an outdoor playground. We know that outdoor recreation, health, fitness, those are things that are incredibly important to us. But we also know that one of the top concerns facing Coloradans these days is just cost of living. And we know that when you have financial stress, that leads to so many other negative outcomes, whether it's negative health outcomes because somebody delays going to the doctor because they don't have the money that month, whether it's just the mental stress of making ends meet. And so for people to have that freedom to be able to go engage in fitness, in recreation, really leading their lives the way that they want to lead their lives, we have to address the affordability crisis. And so that's why there's been a ton of work to make sure that we are cutting punitive red tape. We are giving tax breaks to working class folks. In my area, the nonpartisan analysis said that your average taxpayer in Colorado's 8th Congressional District, and this is an 8th Congressional District specific number, they're going to get about $3,000 back in their taxes that they can turn around to be able to alleviate that cost of living stress, that financial stress, and be able to spend that on whatever they choose. And if that's a gym membership or getting equipment for their mountain biking or whatever they want to do, we're putting more money back into their pockets so that they can lead life as they want to lead it.
Okay, and consumer questions. AARP also very concerned. With these type of questions, Congress is tackling major consumer safety issues as technology rapidly evolves and challenges, including guardrails, when businesses and governments use AI to make major decisions that impact people. What's your philosophy on balancing consumer rights and technological innovation?
Yeah, so we know that the United States is, of course, a global leader, but we are not the only major country that's looking at a lot of these developments. And so for me, the question is, how does the United States maintain its position of global leadership, especially in the AI space? Because if the United States doesn't lead, China will lead. China is desperate to usurp the United States as the global leader of AI. And so if China takes over that position, you now not only have AI, you have communist controlled AI. And if there's anxiety around AI, if the US is the leader of it, that anxiety needs to be multiplied 100-fold if you literally have our biggest global adversary with their heavy-handed communist control ideology as the guiding influence for global AI. So we have to make sure that the United States is the global leader of AI, because then we actually have the ability to control some of the things that you've talked about. So in that space, I actually had a piece of legislation that was in front of the House Energy and Commerce Committee well, I guess we did the hearing on it, which is looking at the juxtaposition of things like AI and social media in drug trafficking. And how do we make sure that we protect folks from things like drug trafficking or exploitation or just monetary scams, deep fakes, things of that in this space. But again, we can't do that if the United States isn't the global leader in setting the standards for AI safety.
All right, and groups like AARP consistently hear from members that rising utility costs pose affordability challenges for Coloradans on a fixed income. In Congress, how would you ensure that affordable utilities are available for older Coloradans?
Great question. We've kind of already touched on it, but I just want to highlight some other things. There was analysis earlier this year that says that the resource allocation mix, so whether it's wind or solar or hydro or nuclear, oil, gas, whatever that source of the energy is, unfortunately, the resource allocation mix that Colorado is pursuing right now is arguably the most expensive resource allocation mix out there. We have to make sure that folks have the freedom to choose the energy source that works for them. Banning natural gas as a source of residential heat by 2050, which is a rule that the Public Utilities Commission here in Colorado is finalizing, is absolutely detrimental to the cost of living, the cost of utilities. And so again, one of the pieces of legislation that I have is the State Planning for Reliability and Affordability Act to make sure that the reliability and the affordability of electrons on the grid, power on the grid, that is top of mind for state regulators and state planners, and that we're not getting dragged down some ideological rabbit trail that's going to raise the cost of living for everybody by jacking up utility rates, which unfortunately is happening in Colorado right now as Colorado goes all in on the most expensive resource allocation mix.
Speaking of affordability for older Coloradans, Colorado established a prescription drug affordability review board to research and review the costs of prescription medication. Do you support this idea, and what steps can Congress take to ensure medication affordability for Coloradans?
Yeah, affordable medication is incredibly important for me. Again, I have a medically complex kiddo, and one of the medications that he has to take on a daily basis, ounce for ounce more expensive than gold. And so making sure that we have access to these affordable medications is critically important to me as it is to so many other families in Colorado. And so we have to look at the underlying cost drivers. Why is that medication so expensive in the first place? I'm generally not a big fan of price caps because usually what happens is then those costs just get rolled over to other portions of the whole healthcare system. We have to address the underlying issue, which is why Congress has invested heavily in things like PBM reform. So you have pharma that makes the drugs, and then you have the actual insurance companies and the providers who work to provide, prescribe, and pay for those drugs. But in between, you have what are called PBMs. They're basically the third-party middleman that's supposed to help negotiate better prices. But when you really dig into the system, what you find is that those prices are oftentimes being artificially inflated. You go look at just the stock returns for insurance companies. You can see that there's like triple-digit increases in the stock valuation for a lot of these big insurers. And so we're very heavily focused on that PBM reform and on making sure that the actual price and not an artificially inflated price to help somebody have a good quarterly report, but the actual price of drugs is reflected. And then from there, then we have the conversation on how do we make sure that that is fairly insured so that people have access to it.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's a lot to chew on, and I appreciate your taking some time out of your busy day to talk to us about AARP Colorado's concerns. Thank you for watching, and please check in on coloradopolitics.com and with AARP Colorado, where we'll have other interviews with the other candidates running in the 8th Congressional District and interviews with candidates for governor.